Okay, all right. Well, without further ado, Sienna, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen, I can stop sharing mine.
Thanks, Erin. So before I dive into it, I guess I'll talk about how this came up initially. During our last presentation, there was lots of questions about web connections stopping working and difficulties connecting to ArcGIS Online via web connections. In this presentation, I kind of compiled a how-to guide or issues that I've seen personally with people using ArcGIS Online web connections and how to potentially get around them. But I'm happy to have just kind of an open dialogue here. So as I'm going through the presentation, if you want to start leaving questions or circumstances where your ArcGIS Online web connection didn't work anymore and something that you learned from that troubleshooting experience, I think it would be really good to have like more of a collaborative approach to this presentation. So for those of you who don't know what OAuth is, so OAuth is a type of authentication. It allows us to have access from FME to ArcGIS Online or another service without you having to save your username and password within FME. So OAuth is like a token exchange. You've probably used it before with other services. You'll be on, let's say, your banking app, and then a connection will pop up and it says, oh, do you want to log in with Google instead? And it's a way of doing authentication without that other service having your username or password. And you can see what it looks like on the right-hand side here. So when you go to log in to AGOL within FME, you'll see a pop-up like this, and you'll just click allow there. So this allows us to access your ArcGIS Online without having your username and password, instead uses tokens behind the scenes. Just a little terminology here because it is quite confusing. We have web connections and web services in FME. So web services are based on the what you're trying to authenticate to. Typically, you'll have one web service shared by many connections. And the web connection is what you actually use in the workspace. So this would be your user access to that service. So there are exceptions to this, but typically an organization might have one or two web services to access their ESRI resources. And then everyone shares those web services and uses their own web connections to get access to ArcGIS Online. Using ArcGIS Online, there's no permissions configured within the web service itself. It's all based off your user credentials and what you enter in to your web connection. So you'll have access to everything that your user would have access to in ArcGIS Online when you do this. Why configure your own? So typically, you probably can get away without configuring your own web service if you are using ArcGIS Online and you only intend to use it in FME form. However, once you go to FME Flow, you must configure these web services. And then if ArcGIS Online decides to change something in their web service or their authentication rules, it's really easy to change the web service within FME if you've already created a custom one. So it allows you to act upon things swiftly. So I'd recommend, just in general, best practice is to always configure your own web service if possible. We have a couple of new enhancements that will affect the way you work with your web services, so I thought I would mention them. The first is our new ESRI ArcGIS connector package. This package was introduced in 2025, but it can be used from 2024.0 on. And what this is, it's a package that lives on the hub. Because our hub authentication works a little differently, you will have to configure your web services again if you are using the newer format. So anyone's using this new format will have to configure their web services again, but we do have step-by-step instructions linked in the article down here, and I'll send this out. I'll send out my slides after this presentation so everyone will have access to these resources. If you're using the new ArcGIS connector package, you'll want to use one of these web services if you're connecting to it. You can identify which services to use because they all should end in safe.esri-eagle. Just in general, using FME, if you see a web service that ends with safe dot something, you will know that's from a package or that is a connection from the hub. And it's a good way to differentiate during this kind of messy transition period between the ArcGIS Online OAuth versus the ArcGIS Online connection. So you know to use the one on the bottom here, this safe.esri one, because that is from a package on the hub. As well, we have an exciting new feature within FME. I think this will make connecting to other web services a lot easier in the future. And that's, we're getting rid of our internal browser that was within FME. And now you can use your own browser when authenticating to a web service. So this keeps you up to date with any of the best security practices because obviously external browsers will be updated quicker, and also it means you could potentially save your credentials in your browser and allows you to log on to these services much easier. You'll notice here that there's a few different options when selecting which redirect strategy to use. The one on the bottom, the embedded browser, that's the one we're getting rid of. So as you're configuring your web services in the future, I'd recommend not using the one on the bottom and sticking with either the loopback interface redirect or the proxy redirect. For most cases, if you're using ArcGIS Online or Portal, you can stick with this loopback interface redirect. That's the one that comes standard with the web service, and I'll show off how to create the web service a little later on in the presentation. So as you're creating that web service, you can pretty much stick with this one, but occasionally a web service will require you to use this proxy redirect. This proxy redirect is more when a web service isn't expecting to use a local application. Instead, it kind of wants a URL. So we give you both options, but for now, stick with the loopback interface redirect. And then if it's not working for you, then I'd recommend moving on to this proxy redirect strategy. Okay, let's get into common issues and some troubleshooting. So I identified 4 things that I often see going wrong. So the first is no matter what you do, the web service isn't working in form, or in form, it stops working on you. The third being my connection works on form but not flow. And the fourth being my connection just stops working on flow. So let's get into it. The first one is no matter what I do, my web service isn't working. The first step is to follow one of these 2 articles, and I'll show you quickly how to set up these web services so that you can use them in form, and then I'll talk about the common issues a little later. So I'm going to bring up FME form now. Through FME form, I want to go to my FME options panel and click on my web connections. So here are all my web connections. In this bottom right panel, I have my managed services. From here, I can click this plus sign and create from, and then I can create from an existing OAuth service. And so in this case, I'm looking for ArcGIS Online, and I'll create an application here. All I have to do at this point is go into ArcGIS Online, create an app through ArcGIS Online, copy over my client ID and secret into here, and then try authenticating with it. So if I pull up ArcGIS Online, the steps are go to new item. I want to create an application. I typically press other application. I have to have a title to that. So Sienna to delete 1 and save. So this application gives me a client ID and secret. And all I have to do here is copy and paste those things over. Now I'm going to go through one of the issues that I commonly find. So going back to my slides here, one of the things I commonly find issues with is people not setting a redirect URI. Natively, this one is the one that's set in ArcGIS Online. But now that we have these new external browser options, the default is actually localhost, so we'll have to manually set that. But I'll show you what to look out for if you do encounter this issue. So if I test that out here, you can see that now I get an invalid redirect URI error. So that one is easy to solve. I'll just go to manage here. Oh, also this gets annoying after a while. Go to manage. And here are where I can set my redirect URIs. So in this case, I'll just copy what I have in my FME and paste that in here and make sure I hit save up here. This is a common issue I also find where that save button is pretty small, so it's easy to miss. Now when I go and I test this out, it will give me this pop-up page. I can click allow. Back in FME, I can see I was able to successfully test my web connection. Now, if it's not the redirect URI, the next thing I start to look at if I'm troubleshooting is connectivity issues. So if you're on a new machine, confirm that you can access ArcGIS Online and Portal. And then if you're using a proxy, make sure that's enabled in FME form. If you confirm both of those things and it's still not working, then it's time to open up a support case. A good place to start if you're opening up a support case is taking a photo of both the web service configured in FME and also what it looks like in ArcGIS Online or Enterprise Portal as well, so that the FME support staff member knows, okay, they've gone through the steps, everything looks right, and then they can start digging into other possible issues. Just out of curiosity, how many people have had issues in the past just configuring those web connections? Is it relatable to anyone? Okay, at least a few people. So hopefully that's helpful. You'll have this recording so you can go through it later, as well as those articles to look back on. The next problem I find people have is their connections continually stop working. To dive into this, I'll have to give a little bit of background on what's actually going on behind the scenes. So once you log into ArcGIS Online using your OAuth, what it does is it returns an access token to FME. These access tokens are basically made to expire, and they have about 30 minutes to 1 hour of life in them. And then after that, they're done, and we have to get a new access token. How we do that is using something called a refresh token. A refresh token is a longer lived token. So once your access token expires, we can get a new one using this refresh token. And this all happens behind the scenes. So this isn't something you really need to know about or care about, but this is what's going on. So access token expires, we get a new one using a refresh token. However, in ArcGIS Online, those refresh tokens will only last a maximum of 14 days. Once that refresh token is expired, it can no longer be used, and therefore we can no longer get that access token. So you have to use your connections in FME form every once in 14 days at minimum to be able to always reauthorize and not have to go through that whole flow again. A little note here is in Enterprise, this expiry can be configured. So you might have an organization with a shorter expiry time than this. I've heard of organizations try to set longer expiry times. So in Enterprise, this is a little different, but basically, if you're trying to run your workspace and you're noticing you're getting ArcGIS Online issues in form, just try reauthorizing the connection. That can be done. So here's my workspace with my connector. If I right click in the navigator panel, I can select edit connection. This pops up, go back to my FME form. That reauthorizes my connection. And now I'll be able to use my workspace again. And if that doesn't work, there's probably a bigger problem that we can look into. But if you can, try to run a workspace with the connection at least once every 14 days, and then you'll never have to go through those steps. The other issue we often have is you'll have a connection that's working on FME form, but it's not working on FME flow. There are some additional steps to configure your OAuth connection if you are working in FME flow. The huge one here being, this redirect URI. So the redirect URI is a little different and has to be configured for each flow instance you're connecting to. So if you have a dev, a test, and a prod environment of FME flow, you'll have to make sure if you're using one app that all of those redirect URIs are listed in a single app. And I'll show you how that's done. So going back to the application that we created before, we can go in and add in our new redirect URI. And this one will be for flow. So if I log into my flow, the best way I think there is to do this is just copy and paste your URL, and then we know it'll be set up as expected there. And then when I go back to my redirect URI, all I have to do is set this to FME OAuth, and again, hit that save button up there. Then through FME form, I can go back to my preferences, go to my web connections, manage my service, and I can choose to upload this to FME Flow. So here's my web service. I'll have to go through again, add the client ID and secret from my web app, but also I would set up my redirect URI like this. Once that's been uploaded, I'll show you what it looks like. I'll close that out. On FME Flow, to find it, I can go to my web connections, manage my web services. This is what it should look like. So you have your client ID, your secret, and your FME OAuth. And then I can try to see if this works through my web connections. By clicking this authorize button here. So in this example, I had not updated my redirect URI, so I'd have to go back to that web application and update that with my proper FME OAuth. And then again, if it's not the redirect URI, the next thing I would look into is, does the machine have access? And then also, is there a proxy issue? Do you need to enable your proxy in FME flow? Some more troubleshooting steps you can potentially do for this is there's an FME OAuth log. And so if there's an issue with FME OAuth, it should be documented in that log. And you can find that under the service, current, and then FME OAuth logs. And the other thing I would do is try going to run the job with log debug enabled and look for this in your log. So connection token expiry information. This gives you the current time and expiry time. And then just make sure these times make sense. You can copy and paste this number. This is listed in epoch time, which is seconds from, I believe, 1970. Copy that into an epoch time converter. You can easily find one online and just confirm that the expiry time and the current time make sense. Again, if you're getting to this point and you're still not sure what to do, this is the perfect time to open up a support case with us and get some additional help. And then the last problem that I see consistently is the connection stops working on FME flow. Luckily, unlike FME form, there's a way to kind of keep your connections fresh. And that's just to create a small workspace, so a reader that only reads in one feature. And then schedule this workspace to run at least once every 2 weeks, maybe a little more frequently if you're still noticing that your connections are expiring or if you have a custom value configured in Enterprise. This should hopefully keep things fresh and allow you to keep using that connection without any interruptions. All right, so if you're still stuck, you need to submit a support case to us. Here's what I would be good to include to get the support case kicked off on the right foot. So screenshots are really important because that's the first thing I would ask for if I was taking your support case. So how is your web service configured in both form and flow? And what are the authentication errors you're seeing? Oftentimes it's easiest to do this via video so we can get a good idea of what's actually going on the back end. The second is your full job log. So either in form or flow, whatever you're working on would be good to know. And then any relevant networking details, things that I like to know are proxies. And if you're in kind of a restricted environment and you don't have a lot of internet access allowed, what are the whitelisted firewall rules that you do have? Okay, that's all I had to present, so it's a good time for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Sienna. If anybody does have questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat, or feel free to, I believe you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, ask a question. Lots of good information from Sienna. Thank you. Go ahead, Patrick.
Good morning. Sienna, you mentioned how these connections that we authorize without a refresh token will expire and have to be reauthorized. How often is that needed without a refresh token?
Yeah, so we expect in most cases the refresh token to last about 14 days. So you get about 14 days of use before they expire. This can be configured in Enterprise, so you might see something shorter if you are using Enterprise and not ArcGIS Online. But that's something you can check in with whoever is the admin on your Enterprise.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Sienna.
No worries.
Looks like we have a comment or a question in the chat. Matt says authorization tokens only last 30 minutes by default. Anyone else have a question for Sienna while she's here? All right, if not, feel free to jump in at any time if you have a question, but just to kind of wrap things up, like I mentioned at the top of the meeting, I do not have another presentation lined up for today. Thank you, David. David posted a link from arcgis.com. David, do you want to follow up on that link, or?
That was mainly to set your the max expiry time,
Cool, thank you.
which I think is for both the access token and the refresh token.
All right, I see Matt, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, that's a great link. Thanks for sharing it, David. It's Matt from SAFE. That page does explain another problem some customers do get into with Enterprise Portal, because there's only one setting for the authorization, or like one token expiry setting, and it gets applied to both the refresh and the authorization token. So the default is 30 minutes for an auth token, and sometimes organizations go in and set it to like 2 hours, thinking they're giving themselves more time, which they are for that initial access token, but that also shortens the refresh token from 2 weeks down to like 2 hours in that instance. So they can actually create more problems. Just something to be aware of if an organization is changing that setting.
All right, great information. Thank you. All right, well, feel free to post any more questions here while I wrap up. I'm going to go ahead and post a link to a quick survey that I put together on SurveyMonkey, just to kind of gauge how the user group is going so far, ways we can make it better, things you're interested in hearing about at future meetings. And with that, I hope to see some of you at GIST coming up here March 16th to 19th in Chicago. I'm sure there will be lots of good FME related presentations. Look forward to attending those. And just a big thank you to Sienna again for presenting, and I will share this recording with everybody along with Sienna's slides after the meeting. So if there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.